Imagine spending millions of naira to buy a property, building a beautiful house on it, completing the first phase of the project, and then someone suddenly shows up and says, "Excuse me, this land belongs to my family." What would you do? Because something very similar happened on a project I was supervising here in Abuja in December 2025. And honestly, this experience taught me one very important lesson about buying property. So, welcome to my first episode of Abuja Real Estate Gist. Hey guys, welcome to the first session of Abuja Real Estate Gist. I'm currently on site, and this morning I just had this thought that, you know what, there are so many things happening in Abuja real estate that people don't know about. So I decided to start this series where I gist you guys about real life experiences, things I've seen, things I've heard, and some of the things you should be careful about when buying or developing properties. And honestly, although I'm calling it Abuja Real Estate Gist, most of these lessons apply to real estate generally. So let's get into today's story. So something happened last year. I was working on a project here in Abuja, supervising the construction. And this wasn't a small project. It was a massive residential project, a two-story building, 5 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and a swimming pool on the second floor. The project was already progressing nicely, and we had completed the first phase. The client was also ready to move on to the second phase of the project. Everything seemed normal. We were preparing to continue construction, and one of the things the client wanted to do was to properly fence the property. So we started making preparation for the phase 2. And then we noticed something strange. We got to site one day and noticed that someone had started clearing part of the property. Then we noticed materials, granite, stone doors, other construction materials. And we were just looking at everything like, wait, who brought these materials here? Because this wasn't our material. Nobody from our team had bought anything. And nobody had informed us that someone else was coming to work on the property. At first we were confused, then we started asking questions. And that was when we discovered that someone was claiming ownership of the property. This person showed up claiming to be a family member of the original landowner. According to him, the property had been sold as far back as 2003, and apparently he was claiming that the property belonged to his family. Now imagine that. You have a client who has bought a property, obtained the necessary documentation, developed the property, completed the first phase of construction, and someone suddenly appears years later claiming that the land belongs to them. Naturally, the client wanted to understand what was going on. At first, the client was actually willing to listen. He was willing to have a conversation. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. Maybe there was something we didn't know. So rather than immediately escalating the situation, we tried to understand the person's claim. But things started getting serious. This person became very aggressive. He started bringing people to site. There were threats. And then he went as far as claiming that part of the building we had already constructed was actually sitting on what he considered to be his property. At that point, everybody realized that this was no longer something we could settle by simply standing on site and arguing. It had become a legal matter because now we are talking about an already developed property. We're talking about a building that had already gone through construction. We are talking about people